Just a few weeks ago, one of my teen daughters was stressing about packing for vacation because she didn't know when her period would start. Ah, the joys of becoming a woman with inconsistent periods. Thank goodness we got KT by Nick's period undies in the nick of time, giving her peace of mind that embarrassment wouldn't ruin her trip. As a middle schooler, she already has enough worry and stress. Those puberty years are a difficult time for so many reasons, but it doesn't help to worry about leaks at school, sleepovers, and sports. Thankfully, KT has completely changed how my daughters feel about their periods. KT period undies look, feel, and wash like normal undies, but they are reusable so she can use them every month. My daughters had so much fun picking from the different colors and styles since these don't scream, "I'm on my period" underwear. I wish I had these when I was a teen. Finally, period protection that keeps up with long school days and everything in between. Check them out. Go to nixteen.com, that's KNIXteen.com, and use code POTC for 15% off. That's KNIXteen.com, code POTC.
When people develop neuroplastic pain, 95% of them develop some sort of conditioned response, where the pain becomes associated with a physical position or activity. So they start to become afraid of these positions or activities because they believe they're causing the pain. But really, it's not the position or activity that's causing the pain. It's the belief that these activities are dangerous that's causing the pain.
That was Alan Gordon on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, just a super quick reminder that you can listen to the podcast ad-free by supporting us on Patreon for just $5 a month. Or you can support the podcast with a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you to everyone who's already supporting us. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host discussion of today's interview.
Hey everybody, it's Jill here, and I am very excited about my guest today. We have Alan Gordon here, who is the creator of Pain Reprocessing Therapy. He's also the founder of the Pain Psychology Center. He developed PRT through years of clinical practice and research, and its efficacy has been validated in randomized controlled trials published in JAMA Psychiatry. He's the author of The Way Out, a revolutionary, scientifically proven approach to healing chronic pain. Somehow, in almost 10 years of POTC, I don't think we have ever done a pain episode. So this has been a long time coming. So Alan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jill.
Yeah, my pleasure. So it's funny, the way that I came to you is I have a grad school classmate who started out as an anxiety person like me and ultimately became a pain person. And she and I and another one of our classmates got together for brunch. We hadn't seen each other in quite a long time. And we got together for brunch. And, usually you sit around and you talk about your kids and whatnot. That is not what we talked about. We sat around and nerded out about psychology and specifically had this whole conversation about pain. And Laura told me this term I had never heard before, neuroplastic pain. So it was the most fascinating conversation. It has led me down a whole path with my own chronic pain that has been amazing and fascinating. And I thought, I need to tell as many people as possible about this. So it started with me reading your book. And that is what we are here to talk a little bit about today. So I thought maybe we could start with your journey a little bit of like how you came to this work and developing PRT.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started out as a chronic pain sufferer myself. Back in 2004, I developed very debilitating chronic back pain. And I saw 3 of the best orthopedists in Los Angeles. And The first one told me it's definitely due to a disc herniation. The second one told me, I actually don't think it's the disc herniation. I think it's disc degeneration. And then the third one, I walked into his office. I'm about 6'4". So he looks me up and down and he says, I actually think you have back pain because you're just too tall. So I got so many different explanations. Here's $600. Thank you. And doctors could not come up with a consensus what's going on with me. So about 6 months later, I'm trying all these different treatments. I finally get an epidural injection in my back. And amazingly, it works. Like it's not 100% better, but it was 50% down. I remember I went to a movie for the first time in several years and was able to make it till the end and was so excited. And then about 8 days later, after the epidural injection, I remember I was lying down reading an article about the Dodgers or something. And all of a sudden, it was like a grenade went off in my head. I had this terrible headache and it stayed. And I was diagnosed with high cerebral spinal fluid pressure, more medications, more treatments. And I just kept getting more symptoms one after the other and thought, what is going on with my body? And that's when I learned about the mind-body connection. But that's essentially how I got into it. Is I had my own symptoms. I started working, trying to understand what's going on with my own body and fixing my own symptoms. And that's how I got into this treatment.
Well, I'm now doing PRT as a patient. And what I found, like the more I research, the more providers I find that do this, I think almost all of them, if not all of them, came to this work because they also have their own story of chronic pain.
Right.
And I've even been looking into getting trained to do PRT as a therapist, because once you do it, I've been suffering from chronic pain since I was 14. So almost 40 years.
Wow.
And to be able to do this therapy and have relief, like you said, after spending so much time and money on ineffective treatments, and then to be able to do this and see such change, it's just, it's making me want to do it with every other person on the planet that's suffering.
100%. When you experience something like that personally, it's just mind blowing. Like, why didn't I learn about this earlier? And you want to get it out to other people. Yeah.
There's part of me that wants to go yell at a lot of doctors and physical therapists. I even said to my therapist, I feel like I'm missing something because it's too simple. And she's like, no, you're not. It actually is that simple. So let's get into it. So before we talk about the therapy, let's do some definitions. So why don't we start with kind of clarifying the difference between acute pain, chronic pain, and neuroplastic pain?
Sure. So pain is a danger signal. If you put your hand on a hot stove, the pain is letting you know you need to move your hand so that you don't cause more damage. But sometimes the brain could make a mistake. Sometimes the brain could interpret danger where there is none, and we feel pain even in the absence of tissue damage or something structural going on in our body. That's what we call neuroplastic pain. The brain is interpreting danger where there is none and generating pain, even when there's nothing going on in your body. And there's this amazing case study of a construction worker out in the UK, and he's out at a job site and he's walking along and he steps on a nail, and the nail goes through his boot and out the other side. And he is in agony. He's rushed to the hospital. They literally needed to sedate him 2 different times in the ambulance on the way to the ER. The doctors wheel him back. They pry the boot off, and they saw that the nail had gone right in between his toes. It didn't even cause a scratch, right? So that's an example of neuroplastic pain. The brain is interpreting danger. The brain is interpreting safe signals that are coming from your body as if they're dangerous and generating pain.
I mean, the research, there are so many different studies where they find loads and loads of people that something shows up on their scans. Oh, yes, you do have a bulging disc. Oh, yes, you do have arthritis. But I don't know the percentage, I'm sure you do, but half of those people, they all have the same problem, but half of them don't experience pain, right? You can't be certain that that's the thing that's causing the pain.
That's actually the first study that I saw that really shone a light on what was going on. Is I have a 5 millimeter disc herniation at T11, T12 with partial nerve root compression. And I remember the doctor holding up this MRI scan and showing it to me. And there's the partial nerve root compression, and it was terrifying. What I read is there's a study from the New England Journal of Medicine that found that 64% of people with no back pain have disc bulges, herniations, degeneration, that these are actually just normal abnormalities. What Howard Schubiner likes to call it, it's like the gray hair of the spine, right? There are these changes over time that come from just normal wear and tear, but are not actually the cause of the pain in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And the older you get, the more likely you are to have those. That's why it's the gray hair, right? As the older you get, the more likely you are to have the wear and tear. Or the other one is, so there's this rubber arm study where they have people put their arm behind a partition, so they're unable to see their own arm. And then they put a rubber arm in front of the partition that they can see that it looks like it's their arm. And then they poke their actual arm with a pin and they don't feel it. But they poke the rubber arm that appears to be their arm with a pin and they do feel it.
Wow. Yeah, that really points to the idea that pain is an opinion. It's your brain's opinion of how much danger you're in. They actually did a study where it was a placebo study where they put people in this machine and they told them that it was going to send electric currents through their head. And it was, I think, the University of Texas, and there was this big machine, and it said on the side of the machine, like shock treatment, something very scary. And really, these are just like old hair dryers from the 1980s, right? They didn't even do anything, but they would pull this big lever and tell people that there were these electrical currents that were going through their head. And over 60% of people actually developed head pain, right? It's like the brain thought there was something dangerous that was going on, generated pain, and it can stay. And this is actually, the example I told you of the construction worker story. That was an example of neuroplastic pain, but it was temporary, right? They pull the boot off. He sees that he's totally fine. The pain goes away. But for many people, they get neuroplastic pain. Sometimes it's from an injury. Sometimes it's from a perceived injury. Sometimes it just comes out of nowhere, like it did with me, and it sticks and it stays. And so that's how the neuroplastic pain can become chronic. And of course, you go to a doctor. The doctor tells you, "Oh, I'm seeing this, disc thing that's going on." So now, you have an explanation for why you have pain. And when it sticks, it's just this pain fear cycle, and it continues on.
Well, I think what was most compelling for me is I'm a big Pilates person, and I legitimately injured myself in Pilates. I injured my back. I've never had back problems. I injured myself. I couldn't move. I had to be put on prednisone, do some stretches, and then I was fine, right? The tissue healed. And then suddenly out of nowhere, it came back. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden I have this like chronic low back pain that I've never had before. And this was the conversation I was having at brunch with Laura and Gabi. And Laura said to me, "Do you remember like when it came back? Do you remember if there was like anything stressful or like, were you having a hard time emotionally?" And I was like, oh my God, I was literally sitting at my desk, like having this horrible conversation with one of my family members. Like it was the most stressful thing that had happened in a long time. And like, duh, now I have this chronic back pain. And as I've been doing PRT and like retraining my brain to understand that I'm safe and my body is safe and that there is no damage to my body and that this is a false alarm, guess what? Back pain going away. And I think for me, all the research was really compelling. I mean, I really read your book with like my mouth wide open half the time. But the one that I think maybe it's because I'm a psychologist that like really stuck with me was the fMRI study where people, and correct me if I get any of these details wrong, but what I remember is people with acute pain who go into an fMRI study, like an actual injury, right? When you have acute pain from an actual injury, the pain centers of your brain light up. But when you have chronic pain, the emotion centers of your brain light up.
That's it. So yeah, they did this fMRI study and they found that people who had an initial back injury, certain areas of their brain would light up. But then when the pain became chronic, they found that the part of the brain that's associated with learning and memory light up, right? So it's like literally becomes learned pain. The pain is 100% real, I want to emphasize. Even when you have neuroplastic pain, the pain is just as real as when it's being caused by a structural injury. They actually did an amazing study where they took people and there were two different groups. One of them, they put this thing that would generate heat around people's arms. It would literally generate structurally caused pain. and they looked at their brain, through an fMRI, and they saw certain parts of the brain light up. And then they took these same people, they would take the electrocurrent wrap off, and they would induce pain hypnotically. And they found that the same parts of the brain would light up. And it goes to show that whether or not the pain is generated by literally injuring the tissue damage, or if it's the brain misinterpreting safe signals as if they're dangerous, the brain processes the pain the same way in each case.
Hey therapists, this is for you. I want you to know about Simple Practice, an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high trust certified, and built specifically for therapists. I've been in private practice for about 7 years, and I've used Simple Practice since I first started. Simple Practice helps me streamline everything. I just send each new client a link, and they log on to my portal to access my consent form, billing, invoices, and set up appointment reminders. I even use Simple Practice as my HIPAA-compliant telehealth video platform. It frees up admin time so I can focus on the important stuff, seeing my clients. And I'm not the only POTC co-host who uses it. Emily does too, and Jill uses it to manage her group practice. If you're just starting out or growing your practice, there's also a credentialing service that takes the headache out of insurance enrollment, which will save you a lot of time and effort. Simple Practice is trusted by over 250,000 health and wellness professionals, and you can feel that in how thoughtfully it's built for our work. If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial and then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
Did you know that standard fridge and pitcher filters do little to remove most contaminants, and bottled water contains microplastics, and that contaminated water, which often looks clear, can put you at risk for myriad health problems? Well, AquaTrue is a countertop water purifier with a 4-stage reverse osmosis system that is certified to remove 84 contaminants and microplastics. 98% of AquaTrue customers say their water is cleaner, safer, and healthier. And as an AquaTrue customer myself, I agree. So if you want to join us for cleaner, safer, healthier water, head to aquatrue.com now and get 20% off your purifier using promo code POTC. AquaTrue even comes with a 30-day best tasting water guarantee or your money back. Take the guesswork out of pure, great tasting water with this exclusive podcast-only offer now at aquatrue.com. That's AQUATRU.com using promo code POTC.
I'm so glad you said that, because one of the questions I have for you is, when it comes to doing this therapy, what is your biggest obstacle? Because my guess is that you get a little pushback of like, are you telling me this is all in my head? And in the book, you say over and over and over, like, we're not saying this is all in your head. This is very, very, very real pain.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier is that it is fundamentally counterintuitive. If you're a little kid and you're running and you fall and you scrape your knee and you have pain, you learn that it was the injury that led to the pain. So everything we've ever learned about cause and effect is telling us that there's something wrong with our body if we're feeling pain. So that's the hardest thing for people, is it's literally like a kinesthetic hallucination. There was a woman in a study that we did, and she came in and she told me, I know you're going to tell me that my brain is causing this pain, but I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Right. And she had pain every time she sat, like clockwork. And she sat down and we did a certain psychological exercise called somatic tracking. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, I looked at her and say, how are you feeling? And she said, my pain is gone. So I'm feeling kind of smug. And I look at her and I say, well, what do you think now? And she looks at me for a few seconds and says, I still don't believe it. Right. So even in the face of literal evidence, it's very hard to embrace that your sensations are lying to you. And so by the end of the study, she was totally out of pain and she was bought in then. But it's a tricky thing because it's fundamentally counterintuitive. We learn to take in information through our senses, and it's very hard to embrace a reality where our senses are lying to us.
Or I know for me what's come up a couple of times. So my initial pain, I broke my shoulder when I was 14. And so I've had issues in that area ever since. Headaches, neck, shoulder, all this. And now that I'm doing PRT, it is so much better. Like my mobility has changed dramatically. Like I can do things in yoga that I have not been able to do in years. However, sometimes I still get stuck and my shoulder clicks and pops and it does these weird things. And every time that happens, I'm like, but wait a minute. Isn't this evidence that there's something structural? Because my other uninjured arm doesn't do that. So even I am on board, right? Like I don't even have the skepticism so much anymore. And yet I just have this automatic response whenever something like that happens. And I'm like, is that evidence that there's something going on in here?
So there's two things that I can say about that. First is a lot of times when we're in a state of stress, it could literally generate clicking or cracking or things like that. One of my friends had neuroplastic neck pain. And whenever it was really bad, I would hear it. She would turn her head and there was like click, click, crack, crack. And so the brain could literally cause physical changes in the body where you could feel those clicks and cracks as a function of stress. But secondly, what I say is there's a lot of times when we feel clicks and we feel cracks and there's no pain associated with it, you know? So I just remember whenever my dad was like, when I was a kid, whenever he was reading the paper and he would stand up, both of his knees go crack, 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 crack. He never had any knee pain in his life, but it's just a normal part of, you know, fluid in the joints and whatnot. And I think the problem with it for you is the fear that it generates. You hear clicks, you hear cracks, you think maybe there must be something wrong with me. This pain is structural. All of a sudden you're preoccupied with it. You're worrying about it. And what we found is that when there's a lot of fear and preoccupation around the pain, it reinforces to the brain messages of danger, right? And that's what leads to the pain fear cycle is like, there's a lot of fear around the pain. Your brain is more likely to interpret those sensations through a lens of danger. As we talked about, that keeps the pain alive.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about how you determine whether pain is structural versus neuroplastic, because I'm sure we're going to have many listeners thinking, okay, yeah, that's fine for you, but mine is really because of my body. So how can they assess whether their pain might be neuroplastic?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, most chronic pain is neuroplastic. Not all chronic pain. You know, I once ruptured a ligament in my wrist and I had a lot of pain from it, but I needed to get surgery. But the strong majority of chronic pain actually is neuroplastic because the body is very robust and regenerative. So one of the things that we look for, there's a set of criteria that we have. And when the pain came on, was there an injury? Did it come out of nowhere? Oftentimes, if it starts with an injury, what could happen is the brain could learn and remember the pain, and the pain persists after the normal course of healing. If it comes out of nowhere, that's a sign that you have neuroplastic pain, where one day you don't have pain, the next day you do. Oftentimes, the pain comes on when you're going through a stressful time. Mine came on during grad school. One of the things we look for is inconsistency of symptoms. Maybe sometimes it's on the right side of your back. Sometimes it's on the left side of your back. Sometimes you have pain when you're sitting. Sometimes you have pain when you're standing, right? Maybe your pain is a little bit worse during the week than it is on the weekends. Structurally caused pain doesn't have that kind of inconsistency. So there's a set of different, 12 different criteria that we looked for. And it's in the appendix of our book. It kind of lays them all out that people could use to really determine whether or not their pain is neuroplastic. But there are patients we've worked with where literally every criteria, it mimics structurally caused pain in every way. It's super consistent. It's always in the same spot. It never changes. And even their pain could end up being neuroplastic. So neuroplastic pain is very good at mimicking structurally caused pain.
I think some of the things that were kind of aha moments for me. Well, first of all, I had debilitating migraines in grad school. And the minute I graduated, they went away, right? Or I think I was asking my PRT therapist, well, okay, so how do I know, so my back hurts when I sit in this chair that I'm in right now. How do I know that it's not a bad chair that's actually making me all tight? And she's like, well, does your back hurt when you sit anywhere else in any other chair? And I'm like, oh, no. And I guess if there were really something wrong with my back, it would hurt no matter where I'm sitting. And she was like, and what do you do when you sit in the chair that hurts your back? I'm like, oh, I listen to people talk about their traumas all day. And I have difficult Zoom meetings, like everything I do that's challenging, I do sitting in this chair.
Yeah. I mean, you can literally get a zero gravity chair. And if you're in a state of stress, you're still going to have pain. So this is actually what happens. When people develop neuroplastic pain, 95% of them develop some sort of conditioned response where the pain becomes associated with a physical position or activity. So in the big study that we did, half of the people had pain when they sat, but they didn't have pain when they walked. And the other half of the people had pain when they walked, and they didn't have pain when they sat. Some people develop pain associated with typing. Some people associate pain developed with standing stationary. So, they start to become afraid of these positions or activities because they believe they're causing the pain. But really, it's not the position or activity that's causing the pain. It's the belief that these activities are dangerous that's causing the pain.
Yeah. The expectation, and it's classical conditioning, right? Like Pavlovian conditioning, where it's just sort of like happening without any effort and outside of awareness. These associations are just made basically subconsciously. That's right?
And it's so hard to embrace the fact that your pain is neuroplastic if you develop a conditioned response. Because if you have pain every time you sit, every time you walk, it makes sense to think it's the sitting or the walking that's causing the pain. So it reinforces that belief that there's something structurally wrong with you. And that really gets to, I'm thinking about it from the listener's perspective, because we've been talking about pain and processing therapy for so long, but we have yet to explain what it actually is. So in the early stages of treatment, what we do is we really help patients gather individualized evidence to reinforce that their pain is neuroplastic. Because if you believe that there's something structurally wrong with you, it is very hard to attend to the sensation without fear. And it is that fear that keeps you in that cycle, that keeps the pain alive. So we try to gather as much evidence as possible. One of the things that we look for is whether or not someone has what we call an exception. So for example, for me, I had chronic back pain, and every time I sat, it was like clockwork. It was always on the same part of my back. It always started a minute or two after sitting. The longer I sat, the worse it got. But one day in 2006, I was at a Laker game, and it was a very exciting Laker game. It was a playoff game, Lakers Suns. Lakers staged a huge comeback. Kobe Bryant makes a last-second shot to push them into overtime. The end of overtime, he makes another last-second shot to win it. It's like a classic Laker game. And what I noticed is at the end of the game, I had been sitting for like the last hour and a half and hadn't had any pain. I was so in the moment. I was really enjoying myself that without realizing it, I had cut off the pain's vessel of reinforcement, which is fear and preoccupation. And I was so excited because I felt like finally I have my first piece of evidence. So a lot of times people will have an instance where they're at a concert or they're enjoying a conversation with a friend, or they're really engaged in some sort of activity, and they don't have the same level of pain that they would have normally in that situation, right? That's a huge piece of evidence. So we help people gather evidence to reinforce that their pain is neuroplastic, but then the bulk of treatment is what we call somatic tracking. It's one of the techniques that we use to help patients get exposure to the physical positions and activities that cause them pain. And we guide them through this exercise in a way to give them a corrective experience. We help them attend to the pain with a sense of objective curiosity, with a sense of mindfulness. We're continuously reinforcing that there's nothing wrong with your body. This is a safe sensation. Your brain is just overreacting to neutral stimuli. We really try to help put them in a light state, something that's called positive affect induction, where telling a joke, saying something silly, trying to lighten the mood to make it easier for them to attend to the sensation through a lens of safety. And oftentimes what we're able to do is help patients get a corrective experience. So they're engaging in the activity that normally causes them pain, but they don't have pain in that instance. That breaks the illusion that there's something wrong with them. breaks the illusion that it's the position or activity that's causing the pain. And there was a woman in the Boulder back pain study that we did where, we were able to help her overcome her pain with sitting and standing, but she had pain whenever she would swim. She loved swimming. So what I actually had to do in our second to last session is I went down to the YMCA with her and was literally doing somatic tracking, yelling at her like from across the pool while she's swimming laps. This is safe. It's just your brain misinterpreting sensations. And by the end, she was able to swim without pain. So if you help the patient get exposure to the position or activity, but in a new way so that they don't feel pain, it breaks the illusion and they no longer believe that they're damaged.
You may have noticed that it's allergy season already, and pretty soon it will be wildfire season. I'm taking care of myself and my family with my new Air Doctor air purifier. It's giving me peace of mind and extra protection from allergens and wildfire smoke. Air Doctor's powerful 3-stage filtration captures extremely small particles, about 100 times smaller than what typical air purifiers can remove. It captures airborne contaminants you definitely don't want to be breathing in: dust, pollen, mold spores, pet dander, wildfire smoke, bacteria, viruses, odors, smoke, ozone, and volatile organic compounds. It's whisper quiet while it's running, not loud like other air filters on the market, and its auto mode feature ensures optimal air 24/7. You'll get reminders to change your filter so you don't need to remember or guess when to do it. Air Doctor won Newsweek's Reader's Choice Award for Best Air Purifier. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code POTC to get up to $300 off today. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee plus a 3-year warranty, an $84 value free. Get this exclusive podcast-only offer now at airdoctorpro.com, airdoctorpro.com, using promo code POTC.
At Great Wolf Lodge, there's adventure for the whole family. You and your pack can splash away in the indoor water park where it's always 84 degrees. There's a massive wave pool, a lazy river, and tons of water slides for your pack to enjoy together. And the fun doesn't stop there. Get ready to explore and play at adventure-packed attractions from Magi Quest, a live-action game that takes place throughout the lodge, to the Northern Lights Arcade. There's also a bunch of great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. And the best part? With 22 lodges across the country, you're always only a short drive away from adventure. So bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Book your stay today at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack.
So let's see, did we talk about all the main elements of PRT? So there's somatic tracking. Part of that is the messages of safety, right? The leaning into positive emotion. I think that's what you were talking about with, like, if you're in that place you normally have pain and maybe you're doing something else rather than the distressing things that you normally do. Are there any other elements to the treatment that we didn't cover that are important?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things is that for some people, somatic tracking doesn't work. It's too hard for them to pay attention to the pain without fear, without wanting it to go away. And of course, if you're paying attention to the pain and you hate it and you want it to go away and there's a lot of fear around it and there's a lot of dread around it, it just reinforces to your brain that it's dangerous and it keeps it alive. So what we do with patients who have a difficult time with somatic tracking is we really help them lean into positive sensations in their body, because there's two different ways of cutting off the fuel source. One is to attend to the sensation through a different lens, and one is to not bring any negative attention to it at all. So sometimes if you just practice leaning into positive sensations in your body, whether it's the breath coming in and out or stretching and really feeling your muscles kind of reaching the end of their limit. And, you're not doing it as a way to try to get away from the pain, but to lean into these nice things. What you notice is after 10 minutes, hey, I haven't even noticed the pain in a while. And it's because you're not kind of fueling it. Another aspect of the treatment that we haven't covered is really working on helping to, and this isn't unique to pain reprocessing therapy, by the way, but helping someone increase their stress threshold and really start attending to their internal state on more of a moment-to-moment basis. So one of the things that I found that I used to do is when I would teach at USC, for an hour and a half straight, I would just go, and I'd be like talking and I wouldn't be focusing on my internal state at all. And by the time the break came, I had a headache or I had a 5 out of 10 anxiety, and so what I found is that if we neglect our internal state for too long, it's kind of like water that's filling up in a bucket. It starts getting higher and higher and higher. And if we don't attend to it and dump that water out, eventually it'll start overflowing. And that's when it leads to pain. So really working on attending to your internal state, even when you're talking, when you're giving a presentation, when you're on the phone, when you're typing an email, when you're driving to pick up your kid from school, if you can keep one eye inward and really focus on regulating your anxiety and attending to your internal state, what you're doing is you're kind of nipping it in the bud before it becomes a problem.
It totally makes sense. And it brings two things to mind. Like, I know for me, I have this constant sense of urgency. And like, as long as I'm doing that, I'm not paying attention to anything at all. And so in order to do what you just described, you have to slow down. And I feel like we live in a culture that does not reward slowing down.
Yeah. And I think that people have a tendency to become addicted to preoccupation, right? You're constantly looking at your phone, all of the texts and the emails constantly and the news notifications. And what that does is there's really what I think of at the heart of neuroplastic pain is a phobia of stillness, right? There's this constant addiction to preoccupation. And there's this feeling of if I'm still for even a second, the physical sensations that arise in the face of that stillness are so unpleasant that we're constantly running away from it. So increasing your capacity to tolerate stillness and attending to your internal state on more of a moment-to-moment basis is really important to resetting that default setting.
Yeah. And I even noticed like how much we carry that, all of that, in our bodies in the form of just tension. So one of the things I do constantly is just remind myself to separate my teeth, right? And bring my tongue down from the roof of my mouth. And every time I do that, I swear I feel a safety message go to the rest of my body. Like it's this weird bodily reminder, like you don't need to be clenching against anything. It's a let go message and it makes everything relax just to relax my jaw.
And what you're doing is you're kind of like backward engineering, telling your body that you're safe. When we're in a state of fight or flight, it's like a zebra in the jungle surrounded by lions. We're in a state of high alert because we think that we're in danger. And our poor primitive brain, because of all the pressure, because of all the self-criticism and the fear and the constant preoccupation and everything that's going on, and the world is falling apart and everything, our poor primitive brain doesn't know that physically in this moment there are no lions. The lions are extinct. So one of the things that we're essentially trying to do is help teach the primitive brain there are no lions, right? You are safe.
Yeah.
And I think even by practicing unclenching your jaw, that's one of the things that you're doing is you're letting your primitive brain know there are no lions. You're safe right now.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to mention too, because this took a little bit to click for me, is when I kept reading the word fear, that didn't resonate for me. I don't think I'm afraid of my pain. And it really just ended up being a language thing that when I think about being distressed about having pain, that just clicked much more for me. And it's the same thing, but it felt like it was a little bit of a barrier for me because I was like, I'm not afraid of it. And I've been living with it. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. It's just one of those things I just have always assumed I have to accept. It's just the hand I've been dealt. I'm not afraid of it. And so I just had to conceptualize it slightly differently to sort of see that even if you're not afraid of the pain, you're distressed about the fact that it's there or that you can't fix it. Or sometimes I might feel more frustrated than fear. But it can be any of those emotional responses that result in that conditioning and that neuroplastic pain.
Yeah,
right?
We just use fear as shorthand. But really, it's just any negative emotional state that reinforces to your brain that this sensation is dangerous.
Yeah. I don't know if this is redundant, but we talked about your story. But what we didn't talk about is how you came up with these specific elements of PRT. Why these things? Why this treatment?
So when I learned about the neuroplastic component to pain, I learned about it from reading one of John Sarno's books, who back in the 80s wrote, I think it was called Healing Back Pain. And it was really the first time that I actually learned, even though he talked about that New England Journal of Medicine study that I mentioned. And it was the first time that I learned, the brain could cause back pain in the same way that we think of the brain being able to cause stomach aches or headaches or things like that. So it was the first introduction to it. But the way that it was introduced to me was that the pain is serving as a distraction against painful unconscious emotions. And so, I started going down that path of like journaling and trying to get in touch with my rage and everything like that. And it didn't really click. And so one of the things that I found just with working with my own symptoms, as well as the patients that I was seeing at the time, was that it was really the fear and the preoccupation around the pain that would keep it alive. And, when you could actually get to a point where you didn't have that same sort of fear or preoccupation and you were to attend to the pain through a different lens, that would shut it off. And of course, when John Sarno wrote all these books, we didn't have access to the neuroscience that we have now, but there's a TED Talk that Lorimer Moseley does. It's really amazing and was eye-opening to me about how pain essentially is an opinion and is the brain's interpretation to perceived danger, which really just kind of like reinforced what I had seen anecdotally.
And I do think those safety messages are really what set PRT apart from other approaches to chronic pain. Like I used to work in behavioral medicine and did both traditional CBT and ACT groups for chronic pain. And they really don't include the safety messaging, which really seems to be that critical factor that makes PRT different. One other question I thought of that I bet you get from people is, how is somatic tracking different from just like plain old mindfulness?
It's a great question. So somatic tracking actually incorporates 3 different components. One of them is mindfulness. You're paying attention to the pain through a lens of authentic curiosity and interest. The truth is, it's impossible to pay attention to anything and be authentically mindful if you think that it is dangerous. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're at the zoo and you pass the lion cage and you're looking at this lion and you're really attending to it mindfully. Look at its beautiful mane. It's so majestic. It's so beautiful. Now pretend that cage isn't there, right? All of a sudden, it's just you and a lion. That animal is a source of danger, and it is fundamentally impossible to attend to anything with an authentic sense of mindfulness if you see through a lens of danger. So that's one of the things that's so important about pain reprocessing therapy is gathering the evidence to truly reinforce that the pain is not dangerous. And that's the second component of somatic tracking, which is safety reappraisal. Continuously reinforcing. I don't know if you're able to integrate this stuff in the podcast, but if you like, we have a 60-second clip of somatic tracking in action where you can actually see a woman overcome her pain in real time that I'd be happy to send along that you could integrate it. Here in this clip that I'm saying like half a dozen different times, this is safe. There's nothing wrong with you. This is just your brain making a mistake. It's misinterpreting safe signals as if they're dangerous. And it's that kind of safety reappraisal that opens people up to authentically be able to attend to their pain mindfully.
Yes, let's absolutely include that. And we will go ahead and stick that at the very end of the episode. So stay tuned to the end and you can hear Alan lead us through some actual somatic tracking.
And then the third component of somatic tracking is what we call positive affect induction, where literally as a therapist, mid-meditation, I will be trying to get people to laugh or smile, or I'll say something silly and have just kind of like a list of different jokes that I could make or funny observations that I can make to really try to break that state of intensity and fear and preoccupation once again to make it easier for them to attend to those sensations through a lens of safety. And once someone gets a corrective experience, they're able to sit or stand or walk or type, and they don't have pain associated with it, it makes it so much easier to interpret that sensation through a lens of safety because you have been given evidence that there's nothing wrong with your body.
Totally.
And from there, it's just kind of like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah. So somatic tracking includes mindfulness, but it is more than mindfulness. The other thing I thought of that we didn't talk about that I think is critically important is that like non-attachment to outcome that you talk about, right? Because I do acceptance and commitment therapy. And so it's a big part of that too, is this like, okay, I'm going to use this tool and really I'm using it because I'm trying to get rid of this thing that I don't want to have. But as long as you're in that mode, that's a fear signal. If I have to get rid of this thing I don't want to have, it's because I'm afraid of it. And so being able to, you call it something other than outcome independence, that like, yes, of course, you want your pain to go away. We know this treatment works. And for it, research to say it works means the pain does go away. But it's almost like you have to look at that as a nice byproduct, but not your goal. Because as long as you're attached to getting rid of the pain, then you're scared and then it's not going to.
Here's a funny story. And I accidentally came upon this by accident, but I used to live in Marina Del Rey when I was going through all this pain stuff. And I would take walks every day and walk, it's beautiful. You're in the marina, there's all these boats and everything like that. And every single day I would take these walks and I was obsessed with the pain. At the end of the walk, it was a good walk if the pain took a little bit longer to come on, if it wasn't as bad by the time I got back, if the pain came on right away and it was really bad by the time I got back, it was a bad walk. If it was a little bit lighter, it was a good walk. And it fully determined my mood. And I just remember one day I thought, I'm done. I'm done feeling like my mood, how I'm feeling about the world, how I feel about my future, how I feel about myself is fully at the mercy of the pain. I'm done. So a good walk is no longer how soon the pain came on, how bad it was at the end. A good walk is now just how positive an attitude I have, how much I'm able to just kind of like enjoy the walk and not buy into the fear and preoccupation around the pain. I kind of like broke away from being so outcome independent. And what I found is after 2 weeks, I was taking walks and I had a zero pain at the end. And I remember thinking,
Wow.
Oh my God, I figured it out. And the very next day I took a walk and I had pain again because I didn't realize that when you do it for that reason, when you're outcome independent as a way to try to get rid of the pain, it doesn't work. So we're not saying you can't care about the pain going away, because of course you're going to care about the pain going away, but you need to make that a long-term goal. I actually had a stockbroker as a patient once, and he said, what you're talking about is exactly how I play the stock market. You can't make decisions and make determinations based on what happens on a day-to-day basis. You need to look at it as like a month-to-month thing. And it's the same thing. You are feeling outcome independent in the short term in order to help overcome the pain in the long term.
That's very well said. Well, I see we're coming to the end of our time here. So if listeners want to learn more, I really cannot recommend Alan's book more. Again, it's called The Way Out, a revolutionary scientifically proven approach to healing chronic pain. There's also a workbook by Vanessa Blackstone. That's the PRT workbook. And that comes with audio files, like so that you can have your somatic tracking led by someone else. There's a couple podcasts that we'll link to. And then if people want to find you have a whole pain psychology center where there are pain coaches. I believe there's a listing that people can do like a find a therapist and find people who have been certified by your clinic.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So where do people go to find that?
If you go to the Pain Psychology Center, we work with people virtually there from all over the world. It also has a lot of resources on that page where you can see what the treatment looks like, video clips of it, whatnot.
And then for the clinicians who are listening, if you want to learn how to do this treatment, you guys offer that too.
Yeah, there's a training center, painreprocessingtherapy.com, that certifies clinicians and how to learn how to conduct this therapy with patients.
And I believe that's where I found my therapist because she did that training. And then I was able to find her listed there. And so I actually see her.
Great.
Which is lovely. And I think that's going to be my next step. I'm like so blown away by this whole thing that I'm going to do the training with you guys so that I can do it.
That's so exciting.
Myself. Yeah. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful to Laura for nerding out with me at brunch and telling me about this stuff. And so glad I was able to connect with you. And I hope that this was helpful for our listeners. So thanks again,
Thank you
Ellen,
so much for having
me.
me. This is fun.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Alan. I'm here with Yael to have our co-host post. Yael, what were your thoughts on my episode.
Well, I am so excited, first of all, that you're bringing the topic of pain to Psychologists Off the Clock, because it is something that so many people struggle with. And there's a fascinating psychology of it. And we so often think about pain as just a physical thing. But as you discussed extensively, there is such an important role that our brain plays in pain. And one of the places that my head went to immediately is that my father was wounded when he was 19 years old. And from then on, he didn't have feeling in the lower part of one of his legs. He was paralyzed below the knee. But throughout his life, he would regularly experience phantom pain, right? So he's not actually having any physical sensation, but in his brain, there is an experience of discomfort that is associated with that body part that's no longer sending any signals. And so that, to me, is just like this really concrete evidence that pain is something that does exist in our body, but also so prominently exists in our brain, even though it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And he and I talked about a bunch of the different research studies and examples. And phantom limb pain was one of those examples. We didn't talk about it in the episode, but he talks about it in the book. And I look at this as like such good news, because I myself have spent so much time and money on physical therapy that hasn't been effective. And because, of course, it's not effective because the pain's not in my body. I was like treating the wrong body part. And now that I have this knowledge and can use my brain, it's like totally changing everything. And I'm so excited for more people to get this information and hopefully have access to this other way of addressing chronic pain.
Yeah, and your conversation with Alan made me think a lot about the conversation that I had on the episode called The Expectation Effect with author David Robson, who talks about like how often we think, for example, that medication is going to have the effect, but actually there's so much research showing that it's our expectation of the medication that really drives the effect of the medication. And in fact, we know about placebo effect, which is when we get better just because we think we're taking medicine. And then there's the nocebo effect, which is kind of like when we think that there's going to be pain, our body sort of prepares for it. And so that expectation in and of itself is creating sensation. And so it doesn't mean that like we don't have bodies, but there's this complex interplay between what we're thinking or expecting or interpreting in our physical experience that shapes what we perceive to be like the reality of the experience. And it also makes me think of this theory of psychological constructionism, which is a theory from a neuroscientist by the name of Lisa Feldman Barrett. She has this terrific book called How Emotions Are Made. And what she showed through her research is that while we think that there's like certain emotion circuits, like there's a sadness circuit, something sad happens and we feel sad, something aversive happens and we feel angry. It's actually not the case. More what is true is that we have internal sensations that through learning, through our experience, we begin to sort of identify as being associated with certain emotions. And I think the same goes with pain, where we have these internal experiences and we say, oh, like that's something that we need to take care of. And so there is a physical sensation, but it's so much about our interpretation and chain analysis, like what we associate it with, like what needs to be done or what is wrong or who needs to take care of this, that we undervalue that process of constructing how we feel. And we instead focus and assume that it's all about the physical sensation. And it's not. There's so much that happens in our mind that leads us to interpreting physical sensations in a particular way.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm understanding it correctly, that's where the neuroplasticity comes in, because when we have that expectation, that construction over and over and over, I mean, it's essentially like classical conditioning, like Pavlovian conditioning, where if every time you move this body part that way or sit down or walk or do whatever, you expect that you're going to feel pain, or you construct this experience of fear in response to pain, and that keeps happening, then we sort of like just automatically end up with these pain responses. But again, like the good news is you can engage in new learning so that you can deconstruct that thing that's been constructed or change your expectation.
Right. And Steve Hayes always says, one of the co-founders of acceptance and commitment therapy, always says there's no delete button in the brain. So I always think about that. So I think it's true. It's hard to deconstruct something that already is, some neural pathway that already exists, but certainly new learning can happen. You can learn and practice making new associations. And that I think is quite empowering. but also kind of makes room for the fact that like there are certain sensations that because of your learning history have associations, have experiences. And so by not making so much of it, but by instead like orienting towards like, how can I create new pathways of association where I understand this differently? It sort of allows for the fact that those experiences are going to come up, but then gives you an opportunity of like what to do with them next.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that stands out to be the most about like what makes this treatment different from mindfulness or ACT even, because there's so much overlap in both cases. But to me, it's really the safety messages. It's that repeated reminder to your brain, to yourself, your body is safe, you are safe. And that is different. At least for me, that is different from anything that I've learned as a therapist with cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure and acceptance and commitment therapy that creates that new association, that new learning.
Yeah, it's kind of like the metaphor that we often use of the smoke alarm. Like if you know that the smoke alarm is going off and that there's not a fire and you're not in danger, it's still annoying, but it doesn't feel as panic-inducing, right? You can say like, okay, it's going off, it's irritating me, but I don't need to like desperately take action. I can just sort of sit in the discomfort and patiently wait for the beeping to stop or whatever.
It's just burnt toast, and I'm going to respond accordingly.
Exactly.
Well, I hope you guys got as much out of this episode as I have gotten out of learning from Alan. Thanks for listening. And even though the episode was predominantly about pain, we actually think these exact same principles apply to many other kinds of symptoms like IBS and chronic fatigue and a number of other things. So millions, tens of millions of people, they're struggling with these kinds of symptoms with no explanation, no effective treatment. So if you have any friends that you know are struggling with this, please consider sharing the episode. And now here's Alan leading one of his patients through somatic tracking.
The only difference is your brain is interpreting neutral sensations from this area in your body as dangerous. And how does the brain communicate dangers? Pain. So Felicia, I just want you to turn your head 20 degrees, 0, 20 degrees, and feel the pain. Let the pain come. But it doesn't matter if the pain comes because we know that there's nothing wrong with your neck. We don't care about stamping the pain out. All we care about is reframing your understanding of what's actually happened. Your neck is sending the sensations to your brain, and your brain is going, and that's all that the pain is. And how does it feel to turn your neck and feel the pain, but not care than you do because you know that it's soft? It's better.
Feels good.
It feels good?
Empowering.
How's your neck feel?
It stopped hurting a little while ago.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.